us today on Town Square Central is returning guest GM Auchand.
Wow.
Is that right? I'm going real French with it.
It is probably less French than that. Wow, less fresh.
Less fresh.
I am feeling unfresh now.
Is it German? We've talked about this. The other way I could see going with it is like, and I can't do German, but like Auchand.
It is definitely like Franco-German, but it's Auchand. Just Auchand.
Franco-German is just English, but that's fine.
Is that how that happened?
Yeah, no, like in 1066, the Normans invaded, and that's where, and then they took over, and that's why we have all these these upper class French words in the English language, but then we also have these Germanic words, and it's why English feels like such a bizarre mishmash nonsense language, because you stuck together two syntactical and grammatical systems that don't fit.
And
why we have overlapping vocabulary.
Why you should never name your kid Norman. Yeah. Because, I mean, you look at pop culture.
You'll bring back some, painful memories for people who were alive 1,000 years ago.
Huh. Yeah. I mean, and again, look at all of the Normans that we know. There's Norman Bates. And
Norman MacDonald.
Osborn. Who's Norman? Norm MacDonald.
I mean, he had to have been... Is he dead? I feel like he's dead.
No, Norm MacDonald is very dead.
Okay.
But
he had to be... He was a Norman. No one is just named Norm, right?
I think Norm from Cheers was probably named Norm, and Norm MacDonald was just named after him.
Maybe.
Headcanon.
Okay. Not real world canon, though. Anyway, the bottom line is yes, don't name your children Norm, and if anyone is listening who's named Norm, you are the exception, and you are wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be talking today about the Hinterwilds, which is a new post-cap hunting ground that you have been working on for quite some time, and sort of the story of how that came to be, and your inspiration for it, and what players can do and experience there. So, Auchand, welcome back to the show.
I'm so happy to be here. I mean, this is the phoenix rising from the ashes, right? For Town Square Central.
Yeah, it's been a while. And I'm glad to be back. And I'm glad to be back with you, friend of the show.
Yeah, no, I love coming on Town Square Central because it is the only podcast that will have me on.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's generally how I book my guests. Is out of desperation.
Yeah. I mean, and there's plenty with me at all times. I'm high on the desperation scale. Not as high as a player who goes to the Hinterwilds might be to get out of the Hinterwilds.
Nice. That was a good little tie-in there. That was good.
Yeah, because the Hinterwilds will kill them.
Yeah. As will you. No, you won't. You're a very nice person.
Yeah, I don't kill players.
I think your reputation may precede you a bit there.
This is true.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Hinterwilds, the Gigas. Gigas?
So I think that the proper pronunciation outside of Gemstone would be Gigas, but I say Gygas.
Gygas.
Kind of like
yes.
Gary Gygax. And I guess the inspiration for the Gygas was weirdly like the Gygas people from Secret of Mana.
Yeah.
A bunch of elementally aligned giants that you had to fight during SOM.
Yeah, great game.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And so when I originally started working on this Hinterwilds area, I decided that I wanted to have giant people there. I draw a lot of my inspiration from things like, for example, World of Warcraft. That was certainly where Fusion came from. Fusion actually came from World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, Materia, right?
Yeah. Materia was
gem
the
slots
driving
and all
piece, but yeah, then gem slots obviously made it a lot easier to kind of contextualize how it would look in Gemstone.
Yeah.
So as far as the Gygas go, the original inspiration was Secret of Mana, and I draw a lot from those old JRPGs that I loved to play when I was a kid and still play now. I wanted to have this very kind of Norse feel to the Hinterwilds, but I didn't want to go full on World of Warcraft, Vreecool, and Frozen Throne sort of sentiment
Yeah.
to the place. So just kind of threw everything into a bag, mixed it up, and the Gygus popped out. Gemstone obviously has a lot of lore around giants, especially stone giants. They've obviously got their own, I guess, great spirits in the form of Mano, Karn, Ilok. But there hasn't been a lot to explain why the giants are the way that they are. We've got, a half dozen different tribes of elemental giants all over the world. Fire giants, storm giants, ice giants, frost giants, I think.
Yeah, in the
stone
Ice
giants.
Mule area, right?
Yeah, I never remember if that they're frost or ice. And then it really raises the question of what is the difference between a frost giant and an ice giant?
One is a little bit colder than the other.
Sure. I mean, they all stay frosty, right?
Yeah.
So
there should be Hoar giants, like Hoar Hoar giants.
I feel like Hoar giants would get me in trouble. Like, people would be like, "Oh, I'm off to visit the Hoar giant today."
It'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, would they live in caves or would they live in Hoar houses?
They would obviously live in a whorehouse, in a giant whorehouse.
Made of ice, right?
Yeah.
And want to be clear
with
that we're
Hoar
talking about
giants.
Hoar.
Yeah. We're using what is it, like the Gaelic word for something that's icy and cold? Or Scottish?
I mean, we have Horbeam as well, and Horbeam is definitely not, wood that you have to pay extra for.
Oh my God. Do you think there's a lot of Horbeam at the Hoar Giants whorehouse?
I think that there is. I mean, it's got to be constructed of Hoar and Horbeam.
Yeah.
Like, Hoar and Hoar byproducts.
Yeah.
Is the answer there.
Yeah. I'm excited for your next hunting ground, which obviously is going to be the Hoar Giants whorehouse.
We think that we are cleverer than we are.
But you know what? I'm probably going to leave it.
So basically, the way that I looked at it was that in order to not just be giant Norsemen like the Vreecool from World of Warcraft, the Gygus needed to have a unique feel to them. And the existence of Elanthian giants and their many diversifications kind of brought it right to the fore for me. Something that would be a cool hunting mechanic and something that is lore interesting. So when the Gygus are exposed to any of the elements and to Bakaris's repeated frustration and to plasma, they develop a resistance to it. And so that's kind of, I like drawing some of these connections. It is clear if you're paying attention that this is how their descendants, the giants, became, permanently imbued with these elements. You'll fire off
like repeated exposure over time caused them to essentially just like internalize it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean,
cool.
You'll see that if you attack a Gygus with like a fireball, for example, they develop a resistance to it and they become immune to it. And that immunity from a brief exposure like this lasts for a few minutes. But if they lived in a series of fire caves, you could certainly imagine that they would eventually just become fire elemental attuned.
Or if they lived in a really cold region with a lot of Scottish frost around, they would eventually just become Hoar Giants.
Yeah. I mean, giant men have to live near them in order for that to happen, because everybody knows that every giant man in Gemstone is Scottish, kind of like how all fantasy dwarves are Scottish.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that Turamzir is very obviously like the British Empire in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Down to their terrible treatment of Tahir.
But they should be like Cockney British.
Yeah. I mean, Ormont Anadhales comes out and he's like, "All right, governor." I mean, God, that would kill it.
What are you doing there?
This is why people killed Mineliana. Like, they just could not live with her terrible accent any longer.
Is what I
Maybe it's
plan.
just me. Maybe I'm the one who is just reading everything out loud like that. My dark elf had a terrible Scottish accent, and as somebody who can now do like a passable Scottish accent, I realize when I look back at old logs, I'm like, I made him sound like a stroke victim instead. Like he he's just slurring words, and I was like, 11-year-old me was going, yeah, that's Scottish. It was not. 11-year-old me would have been scandalized by the Hoar giants as well,
Yeah.
Scottish or not. I just want you to know.
I mean, great. I think that's what we're going for, is scandal.
Yeah, definitely scandalous Hoar giants.
Yeah.
Oh,
That
man.
actually, that might be the title of the episode right there. We've talked about the origins of of this area conceptually for you, and then how you tried to marry that concept with extant gemstone lore. What happened next? Like, once you had this concept in mind?
So I knew that I wanted these giants. Originally, they were just going to be big humans. We're talking like 9-10 feet tall. And Oscuro actually was the one who said, no, they need to be friggin' huge. Like, you want them to be massive and unique because we don't have anything that's that big in the game. And I warred with it for a while in my head because I pictured them being in like big homes and kind of comparing them against the halflings that live in Cold River. And at some point, I just said, you know what? Forget it. They're going to be 30 feet tall. And that made them feel different enough to me. Like, they are really gigantic. It didn't really make a ton of sense that the Gygus would diversify into giant tribes, and the giant tribes would end up being bigger than their progenitors in some ways. In that short of a time, I kind of felt like, obviously evolution works both ways on size, but I just kind of figured that this felt a little more authentic, where Elanthian giants are kind of the decadent remnants of these Gygus tribes that moved south. At any rate, the other pieces that I really wanted in this hunting area were like survival horror. And I had recently watched the terrible sequel to The Thing. And the only thing good about that movie is it's is like one variant of the film poster. And it's basically this guy kneeling in the snow, and one of his hands is like a mutated alien claw. And it actually felt more like the original Thing than anything else in that film. So that mental image kind of kept sticking with me. And so when I was kind of working on some of the other areas of the Hinterwilds, I knew that I wanted it to be a big hunting project. I didn't want it to just be Gygus. So that's where Halfling Cannibals and the Blood Speakers and some of their creations came in. The lead up to Hinterwilds was this storyline wherein Zebin, who is one of the Council of Ten, these ancient halfling liches that have had a long relationship with Icemule Trace, came back, having been basically given a new lease on unlife by Amasalan. Zebin comes back as this vampiric entity that he possesses bodies, and when he possesses them, they slowly start decaying and developing a hunger for blood. It felt a little bit more like Amasalani undead than Lucosian undead. So I wanted to have that kind of theme of Amasalan's corruption, or at least Zebin's personal corruption, across the Hinterwilds. So that's where you end up with these cannibals. We learn in Cold River that the people have always kind of had a weird relationship with eating flesh. When the halfling settlers were heading across the long snow, some of them turned to cannibalism. And they did it, unfortunately, when they were very, very close to the relative safety of the Hinterwilds. So they have this generational guilt over the people that they ate rather than saved.
It's very, very Donner Party vibes.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking miles from safety, and they were like, "All right, it's an all-you-can-eat buffet."
Oh man.
So they have this again generational guilt over that, but also perhaps some sort of curse that causes the halflings to occasionally just run off into the wild and become cannibals. And with Zebin's influence, this process has been sped up considerably. His adherents among the people of Cold River have been expelled from the town, and they are the halfling blood speakers that are out there. When blood speakers engage in cannibalism, basically because they've managed to kill a player, they turn into these hideous, monstrous Wendigos. These Wendigos were kind of inspired by a friend of mine who does some really, really incredible art, and he drew this kind of like faceless Wendigo thing with antlers and everything, and that's stuck in my head as what the Wendigos look like. I got weirdly some pushback from players about Wendigos because there are some obscure references to Wendigos in Giant Man lore about how one of the Giant Man clans made friends with Wendigos, and they're implied to be like their own kind of furry race. I don't mean that as a demeaning term. They're just like generic furry humanoids. So I feel a little bit bad about stepping on that definition and turning these things into nightmare fuel instead.
It's just a different kind of Wendigo.
Yeah, and I mean, for all that we know, giant men just call anything a Wendigo.
Anything a little smaller and fuzzy, a Wendigo.
Yeah, these giant Scotsmen look at something and they're like, "Oh, that's a Wendigo over there."
That's a right Wendigo there.
And everybody else is going, "Dude, that's a tree. Like it's a tree."
Are you sure? Because it looks like it could bite you at any second.
And it's a bit furry. So, the Wendigos were a bit of a sad point, but I really wanted to leave them in, and so they got left in. And then there are these golems, because I think every evil organization needs its own golems. So the Blood Speakers have crafted these golems, clearly not made of Hoar. They are made of like blocks of ice that has been impregnated with blood. And
sounds kind of like a Hoar golem to me.
I don't like where that's going.
What, like HOAR, like a frosty golem?
Yeah, I mean,
I did not use the word impregnated in this context. That was you. So you are the one who has to live with that choice.
Why am I always the bad guy?
You're not the bad guy. You're the person that made the survival horror Donner Party giant vampire murder place.
I don't know what you're talking about vampires. Like, Zebin kind of had this like unique vampire thing going on about him, but everybody else up there is just really, really into blood. So basically that's kind of that boreal forest area where there is this feeling of, I hope, survival horror. At any point, a cannibal can jump out of the shadows and try and eat you. I find it to be relatively challenging hunting. It's obviously near post-cap, but then you head into the Gygas villages for the next piece. And then we've got Angergreft. Angergreft is this huge ancient stone tomb. And it is where the Gygas have historically buried their honored dead. Perhaps the most unusual occupant of Angergreft is Zeroth. Zeroth was a berserker of Vitul who was involved in the Griffin Sword saga, and his race was never entirely made clear. The Though obviously, I think that it would have been mentioned in his description if he had been 30 feet tall. So my thought here was that basically, Vatul, let's say, Ant-Manned him down to size, brought him to huge hulking proportions for a human, but kind of concealed his true Gygas nature because Vatul knew that he had a unique champion in this guy. Zeroth obviously showed some of these signs of adaptability as well, since his hands got burned off and then were replaced with lava rocks. But he rests atop Angergreft. And basically what has happened is that Zebin, the Lich, has used terrible, terrible magics to make Zeroth's divine blood into a weapon. He basically used it to awaken the creatures of the pits of the dead beneath Angergreft in hopes of getting himself a very, very pliable, easy to control army of undead. However, he did not count on the intervention of the Disir. The Disir are, I guess, Valkyries is the best way to put it. But they clearly have some connections to Gosena, being that they are robust winged women that will kick some real ass. They are kind of a unique undead in that they even have their own like special vuln messaging where you don't get that whole weeping child messaging that you do from everything else. So the pits of the dead are basically these disturbed dead. The Disir there are a little inflamed by bloodlust because of what Zeroth's blood is doing to the undead down there. So they'll, kill you as quickly as they will anything else down there. And then Angergreft itself has been kind of taken over by two factions. Historically, it's been a nesting place for these giant worms called Undensormer. And then Wyrms, like we're talking basically wyverns or dragons. Early on, I was told that I could not make them dragons, even though this was, an area that we had never explored before, and we know that Elanthia's dragons are somewhere. So
they're like connected with the origin of the planet or something, right? Like, isn't that the lore? It's something like that.
Yeah. Basically, they are. The way that dragons happened is that the drakes. I've always seen the drakes as being to dragons what Arcadi are to humans, which is that they share kind of a similar form, but the power level is massively different. And they can obviously take on whatever forms that they want, but this is kind of the default form for the drakes, just as the default form for Arcadi is humanoids. I knew that I wanted to do something with, scaly giant winged reptiles. And after a lot of wrangling with Galeen, who was my boss on the world team, we decided that worms were the right way to go. It wasn't something that we had used before. There was some opportunity to use wyverns, but they're so tied in with Tavalor that I wanted to have a different noun here. And basically, once I realized that they weren't going to just be wyverns, I had the opportunity to kind of make them into something unique. So again, drawing on a little bit of, fantasy inspiration, I had Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings trilogy. Well, not trilogy. She's done 9 books now in that area or more, but she has a very unique dragon life cycle. And I kind of pulled a little bit from that, where they're born as, well, they're laid as eggs. They're these worm cultists that kind of keep the eggs on top of Angergreft. They have over time, because Gygas are super adaptive, they have turned into, hideous reptilian mutants over time. And they basically tend to the Undensormer, which are the larval form of these worms. And when I say larval form, they're like a 40-foot long worm. So you know that the adult is going to be quite large.
Yeah, just a little bit big.
Yeah. And so that's basically where the worms in the Hinterwilds come from, is that they've got this life cycle that is based around Angergraft. The Gygus had always been smart enough to kind of leave the upper stories of the tomb to them. They work really, really well as defenders of that place as long as they are not interfered with. But of course, Zebun, in his arrogance, sent his Gygus disciples to Angergraft, and so there is some struggle going on up on the upper stories as well. Basically, the whole place is a realm in conflict, and I'd like for it to feel as living and as dangerous as is humanly possible.
And is that all of the areas within this region?
Yeah. You've
Okay.
got Boreal Forest, Gygus villages. There are three of those. You have Angergraft, the outside, and then you have the Pits of the Dead.
So this sounds like a pretty massive undertaking in terms of, I mean, obviously the conceptual work of coming up with like, what is this place? How does it fit in? What am I drawing from? And then how can I make it work with the current world? Like that's obviously a fair amount of work, and you've got to run that through the proper channels to make sure you're not, treading on any lore toes or anything like that. And then the actual work of creating it, right? So what were you trying to solve or to do with this place that had not existed already in game?
So what hadn't existed in the game before Hinterwilds was a far post-cap hunting zone, something to challenge that top 1% of players that have just gotten themselves so packed with skills through Ascension and post-cap training that nothing really feels like a challenge anymore. I think that there's a significant chunk of the game population who can find a challenge in the Pits of the Dead, which is the highest of the hunting zones, that they couldn't find anywhere else. We also started talking about, what does Ascension training really look like? So, as somebody who's always been interested in creatures in Gemstone, I wanted to give myself the opportunity to kind of create a new paradigm for creatures. So we now have these Ascension creatures. They have different stat calculations than your average 1 to 100 creature. The entire goal is to make it a little bit more challenging and in line with the tremendous power that players have access to after Gemstone being around for 30 years. So those were all major goals of this piece. You're correct in that, yes, it did take an awful lot of wrangling. I'd say that the biggest piece was probably not approvals for once. The approval process is always a little bit difficult to get through. But in this case, I had two really, really supportive GMs, Istild for dev, and obviously Galeen for the world team, who were both full of insights and everything. We also had Oscuro weighing in quite a bit on some of the Gygus capabilities and the like, just giving me advice on what he would like to see. So I definitely see some of his fingerprints on some of the things like the Gygus picking you up by the hair and throwing you. They don't do that to bald characters, which is great.
That's awesome. So it literally checks their hairstyle?
Yeah.
That's great.
So there was a lot of that went into it. I think that we were also hungry for a new way to do, post cap rewards. A lot of those are still in play as far as the design process goes. So we're still working that piece out, but even with those carrots not on the table yet, we've seen a lot of players exploring the Hinterwilds very thoroughly.
That was my next question, was how players have received this new space. Like, can you talk about that? Like, what's the reception been like? And then are there any, based on any of the feedback that you've gotten, are you planning on adding or making changes?
Yeah, I have not yet released a project. Well, sorry, I have not released a project that has had this much universal acclaim before. It
Even
feels like
Fusion.
Oh yeah, even Fusion. There were a lot of players that did not like Fusion or did not think that we should have so many limits on Fusion that we had. And obviously, Fusion as it currently exists is not how I envisioned the system. I make no bones about the fact that I'm not pleased at its current state. I feel like we had somebody that was very, very zealous about trying to get it in line with the other abilities, and it was never readjusted once things like Duskrune came around, and changed entirely what the standard of power for releases was. But even in its original form, like Fusion was, I would say like a solid B. People liked it, but there were definitely criticisms. Um, Spirit Beasts 1.0 was very much a like, oh, we like this, but none of us are ever going to use it. And Spirit Beasts 2.0 was like a B minus in terms that like I actually see people playing with them regularly. But this one was probably the first project that I've had in Gemstone that I just felt like kind of knocked it out of the park. And that's a really, really nice feeling as a designer. Um,
Yeah,
there were
well,
certainly,
all that work and effort, and I know that with any creative project, there's always 10 times the amount of planning and drafting that goes into it versus the final product, right? So it must feel incredibly satisfying to have like a great reception to something you work so hard on. Must feel awesome.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean,
what critical feedback have you gotten from players? Or like what actually both two things. What have people said that they really love about it? Like what about this thing have they enjoyed? Is it the fact that it is filling this niche that before was not really addressed, or is it stylistic? Is it mechanical? Like what do they like? And then what is it that you feel like still needs to be addressed?
I don't want to, insert myself into what players are thinking about it more than just feeling like it's been overwhelmingly positive from, some of their feedback. There's a pretty robust discussion about virtually everything about it on the Discord. But I would say that the things that I've heard them like best about it were that it is challenging. They love having a new hunting ground where they can kind of, go crazy. I think that they like the flavor of the area. I think that what they probably don't like is that they want to see more carrots. There's a lot of stick there. Right now, the biggest carrot is the fact that you have less loot competition because not everybody can survive in the Hinterwilds. So that is a significant carrot. It is not what we want the carrot structure to look like in the long run. I think it has also exposed maybe some, I won't say weaknesses, but we'll say gaps in Gemstone systems post cap. For example, Sheer Fear absolutely did not work in a great way. For people that were trying to fight something that was level 120.
Because they're
There is,
just completely helpless.
yeah,
Yeah.
you turn into a gibbering, schlub.
Yeah, enjoy your post-cap hunting, noobs.
Yeah. So that was definitely a challenge. But, the dev team has worked very, very hard to get some of those things in line or make them less binary. There were some updates done to Sheer Fear to make it not just completely incapacitate you
Like
and
a
make you
sucker,
unable to
a
hunt.
save or suck kind of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I think that it has helped us kind of explore some things that we needed to do in the long run anyway.
Do you have any favorite mechanics on these creatures that you've created here? I mean, you mentioned the throwing people by the hair unless they're bald, which mechanical power creep coming in, man. You're going to see a bunch of bald post-cap players running around. But do you have any favorite mechanics or little
Oh, I
tidbits or
do.
Easter eggs?
I do want to be clear. It doesn't save you from getting thrown. They just don't grab you by the hair. They grab
Oh,
you
they just grab you by the head?
I believe it's by the head. It might be by the throat, and then they just toss you into another room.
Oh. I thought you were
Um,
gonna have a bunch of people like running to get their hair, just shaving their heads to gain. And Gemstone players totally would do this, right? Like if there were a 0.005% chance that you'd survive more, everyone would go immediately shave their heads.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we definitely that on the subject of feedback, definitely got a lot of players that wanted to have warm clothes that they had purchased for other environments, like give them a mechanical advantage in the Hinterwilds, because there is, it's freezing cold there. And I get it, but when you release a new area, you need to have area specific things that players need to acquire and work on. So I would say that the biggest things that I enjoyed about creating Hinterwilds, the first was the puzzle to release the Chthonian Sibyl. That's something that's much, much easier to type than it is to say.
Chthonian Sibyl?
Yeah, so there is a creature in the pits of the dead that is referenced as a taint that is entirely separate from the one that Zebin brought to the area. It is a far post-cap undead boss, and she basically has a lot of similarities to the fates of Greek mythology. She pulls out life threads and snaps them. She casts Meteor Swarm, which is hilarious. Anyway, players found a way to access her. It's basically a 3-part puzzle where you have to get some rare ingredients, and I'll leave it at that. Players know how to do it now, so I don't feel too bad about discussing it. Just kind of putting that in was really, really fun, and it took players a lot longer to figure out than I thought that it would.
That must be satisfying too, like adding a secret that only you know, and then waiting for someone else to figure it out. Like that must be a nerve-wracking and also like super satisfying thing.
Yeah. And I mean, Gemstone, because everything can be scripted and easily tested. It's sometimes hard to keep some of these puzzles feeling like puzzles for very long. Players just brute force a lot of things. I would say that my favorite mechanic in the place is players complained that the flayed Gygas disciples cast implosion because nobody likes being focus imploded. It's another save or suck sort of situation.
Right.
And so I ended up going, all right, I want to have that feel of them, ripping a hole in reality for evil power. But I agree that implosion is just not a pleasant spell to be on the receiving end of. And so I made them basically tear open a hole into another dimension and have these milky, sappy tentacles fling out. And it does some of the basic implosion things, except it can't be focused. And you get players getting yanked out of other rooms by these giant tentacles and dragged toward the rift. That is definitely a mental image that I enjoy.
It's also, I feel like, scarier than just like suddenly boom, you're dead. This like Lovecraftian like space horror tentacle arm like tearing you across the that sounds terrifying to me.
For sure, absolutely. So there's that, and then oozes. I was shocked that Gemstone did not have oozes. Creatures that are just basically a bowl of jelly gone bad. So
like the D&D black pudding kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and so Gemstone didn't have these, and it was driving me nuts. And I was kind of trying to rejigger a lot of how the creatures sat in the hierarchy. Gygas disciples, for example, were going to be in the Gygas villages for a while. And when I decided to split them out into 4 hunting areas, all of a sudden I had room for new creative designs. And I said, all right, we're getting oozes. And my favorite thing about oozes is an unintentional interaction with the bounty system where you can create a grizzled ooze, one of the really strong ones. And its babies will also be grizzled oozes.
Oh, that's great.
So you will find that in the pits especially, sometimes an ooze will get in, a grizzled ooze will get in, and somebody can't kill it. And you will end up with like 24 grizzled oozes that have just replicated down there. And you need to have like one of the real top like 0.001 percenters.
That's when you go call Roblar in to take it on. Yeah.
Or Melivin. I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Malivin.
Malivin?
No,
Is that really?
I mean, no, but that'd be fun. Wait, we
I,
should do it. We should do it like a giant would say it.
Maliven.
Maliven!
Or do they just call him a Wendigo?
Yeah. Look at that fuzzy monster.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the most entertaining things. Is it happens very rarely, but seeing the call go out for like, I need an adult, and
Well, that's like
please come
old
and help
school
me.
gemstone stuff too, right? Like when people had to like get on the Amunet and request like a rescue or help or whatever. Like I don't know. I feel like I like that idea that like this thing is so bad we need to go get our I don't know what to call them, like Wendigo helper friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Wendigo.
Wendigo.
When are they Australian?
I'm doing
now?
something Australian with it. Yeah, I think they are. That's canon now.
Okay.
Wendigos speak with Australian accents.
I mean, they do use other people's voices, so I could definitely see that happen. Yeah, that is something that very, very late in the Hinterwilds design cycle I really wanted to do, was make it feel like a classic gemstone area.
Yeah.
So I very much said, like, no tables. We're not going to do tables so people can hide away and just not be seen. It basically forces you to sit in a common room of an inn, and I don't really care if people AFK there or what have you. It just reminds you that other people are in this as well. And
right.
so
yeah, I like that too. This sort of like forced social dynamic.
Yeah. So a lot of it is just that social feel and the psychological feel of, when I'm out in the wilds, things will punish me if I'm in a group.
Right.
You have, Gygus going ahead and throwing me into other rooms. You have two abilities called, I believe it's Vitul's Wrath and Fashlanay's Insight. Vitul's Wrath gives everything a stacking AS buff if based on the number of players in the room. And Fashlanay's Insight gives them a CS buff based on the number of players in a room. So that's a big one. Like, it disincentivizes grouping. Certainly players do it, but you don't have these giant death balls rolling around out there. And then when you get back to civilization, you can kind of be with other people and relax in the warmth. And
it feels like how it would have to actually happen, right? Like these heroic figures run off into the wilderness to test themselves against these horrific things, and then they all kind of come back together and lick their wounds and rest and wait in the warmth of this like one safe space nearby.
Yep.
Well, GM Auchand, thank you so much for joining us today on Town Square Central. I do have a post-cap character. Milax is level 100 exactly. I don't know that I am up to hunting in this terrifying place that you've created, but maybe I'll check it out and die a couple times just to get a feel for being thrown around by the hair and tentacle slapped.
Yeah. I would say start in the Boreal Forest.
Yeah.
It is the lowest of the post-cap hunting grounds, and there you can stomp on cannibalistic halflings and blood speakers or half golems, stomp on you, and enjoy, watching Wendigos rip you apart.
What you mean, Wendigos?
No. Again, they're not Australian. They are clearly Scottish.
Yeah.
Wendigo.
Okay.
Now there are two of them.
And then before we go, Auchand, we should ask, do you have any projects that are, coming down the pipeline that you want to talk about a bit here, just to wet some whistles?
I mean, in terms of whistle wetting, there is the project. The project.
Like the singular project.
Yeah, it is.
Is this like a capital T, capital P, the project?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of along the terms of, you might have a project, but this is the project.
This is your like front burner. You have it, the one that has like the high gas output so you can boil water quickly. That project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, let's see. What can I tease about it? Oh, man. Nope, there's nothing. Players are going to have to figure it out for
Oh,
themselves.
that's not kind of you. That was messed up.
And we've taken on the Discord to blocking off the project with spoiler tags. And now I just mention it. I do want players to know that it is a real thing and it's not just me trolling. I'd say that I'm about half done with it.
Is this like a really cool item or like a new town, or you're not going to say anything about it?
I will say that you're not wrong in asking if it's a new town, but it is not a new town.
Okay. So a little cryptic tease from, I don't know, friend of the show. After leaving me disappointed with that, I'm going to call you acquaintance of the show, GM Auchand, who will need to, at some point in the near future, when the project is further along, come back and give us a fuller spoiler about what we can get excited about next.
Yeah, so I have learned not to announce things until they are out of QC. The Hinterwilds took us a little while, obviously, especially when we had to readjust some of the post-cap mechanics. So this time, going to be a little bit more careful. But I have a feeling that this project will appeal to a lot of people, certainly Vuln people, and that is the only concrete tease that I will give.
Vuln people, be on the lookout. Like they didn't already have it good enough, you know?
Yeah.
You know what we need as a project? We need someone to redo the Council of Light.
I don't even know what that is. Like,
I just made that phrase up. It's not even a thing, you know? That was a test or something.
It sounds like a weird test. I mean, just to string random words like that.
Yeah, it's like a monkey on a typewriter, you know? That was my brain right there. But whatever it is that I said, someone should, look into that.
Yeah, I mean...
Some enterprising GM should do that.
You could have easily said things like chairman of legumes or...
I 100% feel like there should be a chairman of legumes. Instead of, to use another random phrase I'm just going to make up off the top of my head, the Grand Poobah, there should be a chairman of legumes running whatever it is that I made up a minute ago.
Yeah, I will tell you this. In honor of you, there will be a bathhouse for no reason in the next thing that I release.
Yes! Okay, and can there be a legume reference somewhere in the bathhouse, please?
I will definitely look into the legume reference.
Okay. We could, this could be like the sister structure for the Hoar Giant house.
Yeah, I mean, the Hoar Giant house definitely probably has its own bathhouse already.
Yeah, but it's not a legume bathhouse.
It is definitely not. Now, do they wash the legumes there?
You're going to have to wait until the project is released to find out.
Dun dun dun.
All right. And it's Hinter. I always get Hinterlands and Hinterwilds mixed up.
Hinterwilds.
Okay. All right, fuck it. We'll do it live.